The sky over Vera 9 was the color of a bruised plum, thick with chemical smog and the burning exhaust of heavy freighters lifting off for the core worlds. Down here on the surface, the air tasted like sulfur and stale ambition. Mara Quinn wiped a smear of hydraulic fluid from her forehead, leaving a dark streak across her pale skin. She leaned back against the rusted hull of her courier skiff, a modified jumper she had christened the Rusty Needle because it was sharp, fast, and hurt like hell to ride for more than 4 hours. Mara was 24 years old and had already lived 3 lifetimes worth of trouble. She was a mechanic by trade and a courier by necessity, running parts and data chips through the treacherous junk lanes that orbited the moon. It was dangerous work, illegal in 3 sectors, and completely necessary if she wanted to eat. She checked the fuel gauge. It read 12%, just enough to get back to the docking bay, provided she did not have to outrun a patrol drone. She kicked the turbine housing. It rattled, then hummed a low, steady note. Good enough, she thought. She pulled her goggles down around her neck and looked up at the flickering holographic billboard dominating the plaza. It showed a sanitized image of the Imperial fleet. Pristine white ships sailing through a nebula. The text scrolled beneath in golden letters. Unity through strength. Peace through order. The dragon watches over us. Mara snorted. That was the latest propaganda push. Dragons. The government had been feeding the Outer Rim colonies stories about ancient star beasts for the last 5 years. Supposedly, the Emperor had tamed one, a creature capable of folding space with its mind. Most people on Vera 9 laughed it off as black-budget hallucinations or metaphor. If the Empire had a dragon, they would have used it to lower the tax rates on oxygen recyclers. Instead, they just used the image to sell fear. Dragons were fairy tales for the core worlds. Here, the only monsters were debt collectors and orbital debris. Mara gathered her tool belt and headed toward the loading dock exit. She had a delivery credit to collect at the last bolt, a station bar that sat precariously on the edge of the atmospheric dome. It was the kind of place where the drinks were watered down and the patrons were wanted in at least 2-star systems. The bar was crowded, smelling of ozone and cheap synthetic ale. Mara pushed through the press of bodies, keeping her hands close to her pockets. She spotted her contact, a nervous Rhodian salvage broker, and made the exchange quickly. 50 credits. It was barely enough to cover fuel and a protein bar, but it was money. She was turning to leave when the noise level in the bar spiked. A table overturned with a crash of glass and metal. Mara sighed. Bar fights were common, but she usually tried to be on the other side of the airlock when they started. She glanced over her shoulder. In the center of the room, a man was surrounded by 3 mercenaries wearing the distinctive heavy coats of the local guild enforcers. The man was tall, wearing a flight jacket that had seen better decades. He was handsome in a way that suggested he knew it and used it to get into trouble. Dark hair, sharp jaw, and currently, a very bloody lip. One of the enforcers shoved him. The stranger stumbled back but kept his balance, raising his hands in a mock surrender that looked more like a taunt. "Gentlemen," the stranger said, his voice cutting through the din. "I think there has been a misunderstanding regarding the ownership of those credits. I merely borrowed them from a future where I had already won the game." The biggest enforcer drew a vibro knife. Mara watched, intending to stay out of it. Then she saw the stranger's hand drift toward his belt. He was hurt, favoring his left side. There was a dark patch seeping through his jacket. He was not going to be fast enough. The enforcer lunged. Without thinking, Mara grabbed a heavy spanner from her belt. She never went anywhere without it, and threw it. The tool spun through the air and cracked the enforcer's wrist with a sickening thud. The knife clattered to the floor. The enforcer howled, clutching his arm. The stranger did not waste the second Mara had bought him. He swept the legs of the second attacker and slammed the third man's head into the bar counter. It was messy, desperate fighting, not the polished martial arts of the holovids. Mara was already moving. She grabbed the stranger by the back of his jacket as the first enforcer scrambled for a blaster. "Move!" she ordered. The stranger looked at her, his eyes bright blue and dilated with adrenaline. "An excellent suggestion," he said. They bolted for the rear service exit, bursting out into the cool, smoggy night of the alleyway. A laser blast scorched the doorframe behind them. Mara led him through a maze of conduit pipes and steam vents, a route only a mechanic would know. They scrambled over a fence and dropped into the shadow of a waste processing unit. Mara stopped, chest heaving. She glared at the man. "You owe me a spanner," she said. "That was a high-grade alloy." The man slid down the wall until he was sitting on the grimy pavement. He clutched his side, wincing. "I will buy you a factory of them," he wheezed. "I am Saren. Saren Cade. Mara Quinn," she said, crossing her arms. "And you are bleeding on my boots." Saren looked down at the wound in his side, a puncture, likely from a previous fight he had failed to finish. "It looks worse than it is." "It looks like a gut wound," Mara said, kneeling beside him. She pulled a med patch from her utility pouch. "This is going to sting. And since I am using my supplies, you owe me another 50 credits. Add it to the tab," Saren said through gritted teeth as she slapped the patch over the injury. She worked quickly, her hands steady. She had patched up enough pilots to know the difference between a scratch and a death sentence. This was bad, but he would live if he stopped moving. "Why were 3 guild enforcers trying to dissect you?" she asked. Saren leaned his head back against the wall, watching her. "I asked too many questions about a certain shipment. People on Vera 9 get very touchy about their cargo manifests." Mara sat back on her heels. "You are a spy. I prefer the term independent contractor with a curiosity problem," Saren corrected. He studied her face, his gaze intelligent and calculating. "You move like someone who knows the back alleys, and you threw that spanner with terrifying accuracy. You are a courier?" "Mechanic," Mara said. "I drive to pay for the parts." "Good," Saren said. He struggled to stand, using the wall for support. Mara instinctively reached out to steady him. He gripped her arm, his fingers strong despite the blood loss. "I need a pilot, Mara. Someone who knows the low-orbit junk lanes. Someone who can fly under the sensor grid." "I am not interested in smuggling narcotics," Mara said, pulling away. "Not narcotics," Saren said, his voice dropping low. He looked around the empty alleyway. "I need to move a single crate from a storage facility in the southern industrial district to a research ring in geostationary orbit." "Tonight?" Mara laughed. "The research rings are restricted airspace. The Imperial Navy patrols that vector. You are talking about a suicide run. I will pay you 10,000 credits, Saren said. Mara froze. 10,000 credits was enough to buy a new engine, pay off her docking fees for 5 years, and maybe get off this rock entirely. "Half now," she said automatically. Saren tapped a sequence on his wrist comp. A chime sounded from Mara's datapad. 5,000 credits. Verified. Mara stared at the screen. She looked back at Saren. "Who exactly are you?" "Saren Cade. Just a man trying to correct a mistake." He said, "Do we have a deal?" Mara Quinn had made a lot of bad decisions in her life, usually involving men with nice smiles and dangerous baggage. This felt like the biggest one yet. "Get in the skiff," she said. The flight to the southern industrial district was tense. Mara flew the Rusty Needle low, hugging the terrain to stay beneath the radar floor. Saren sat in the co-pilot seat, watching the readouts with a professional eye. He did not ask how she bypassed the security gates. He just watched her work. They landed in a darkened warehouse sector, the rain beginning to fall in heavy, oily sheets. Saren led her to a nondescript hangar. Inside, surrounded by stasis fields and security drones he had apparently already hacked, sat a container. It was not large, perhaps 3 meters long, made of a matte black material that seemed to absorb the light around it. Mara walked around it. The air near the box felt heavy, like the pressure change before a thunderstorm. The hair on her arm stood up. "What is in here?" she asked. "Spent uranium? A gravity bomb? Open it," Saren said softly. He keyed a code into the side panel. The locking mechanism hissed, venting cold white vapor. The lid retracted slowly. Mara stepped forward and looked inside. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a creature. It was curled into a tight ball, its scales the color of deep space, shimmering with iridescence that shifted from violet to black. It had a long, sinuous neck and folded wings that looked like they were made of razor-thin obsidian. It was asleep, its breathing slow and rhythmic, but it was the feeling that hit her hardest. Standing this close, Mara felt a hum in her bones, a vibration that was not sound but pure presence. It felt like standing next to a starship engine while it was spooling up, but organic, alive. "A dragon," Mara whispered. The word felt ridiculous in her mouth. "Calith," Saren said. He looked at the creature with a mixture of reverence and fear. "The promised dragon." Mara backed away. "This is real? The stories?" Saren nodded. "He is not just an animal. Mara, he is sentient. He is older than the Empire. And he is the reason the sectors have not torn each other apart for 100 years. The Emperor claims to control him, to hold the leash. So why is he in a warehouse on Vera 9? Because he was stolen." Saren said, "Not by me, by a faction called the Meridian Blade. They are a coup movement within the military. They brought him here to a private research ring to experiment on him. They want to weaponize his navigation abilities." "Navigation?" Mara looked back at the sleeping beast. Saren touched the edge of the container. "These creatures can see the pathways between stars. They are living star maps. The Meridian Blade wants to cut that ability out of him and put it into a targeting computer. If they do that, they can bypass any shield, jump any fleet instantly to any coordinate. They will not just rule the galaxy, they will hold a knife to its throat." "And you are stealing him back?" Mara asked. "I am getting him out," Saren said. "I am taking him to a sanctuary where he can wake up. But I need to get him to the transfer point on the research ring first. My contact is waiting there to get him off-world." "This is treason," Mara said. "This is saving the future," Saren countered. Mara looked at the dragon. She looked at Saren, who was pale and swaying slightly. Then she looked at the 10,000 credits in her account. It was not about the money anymore. She could feel the creature's distress, a low-level static in her mind even while it slept. It felt wrong to leave it here. "Load it up," she said. Getting the container into the cargo hold of the Rusty Needle was easy. Getting into orbit was the hard part. Mara flew like a woman possessed. She took the skiff up through the atmospheric turbulence, fighting the crosswinds. She slotted the ship into a lane of automated garbage scows, mimicking their transponder signal. It was a trick she used to smuggle high-end engine parts, but a dragon was a different weight class. Saren sat beside her, monitoring the passive sensors. "You have good hands," he said. "You can compliment me when we are not dead," Mara snapped. Wrestling with the yoke, they approached the research ring. It was a massive halo of steel and glass floating in the darkness, bristling with antennas. Mara guided the skiff toward a maintenance airlock on the underside of the station, an area usually reserved for waste extraction. She clamped the ship to the hull. The magnetic locks engaged with a heavy clank. "We are in," she said. They moved the container on a grav sled, pushing it through the narrow, steam-filled corridors of the station's underbelly. The station was quiet, the hum of recyclers masking their footsteps. They reached a junction near the secondary hangar. Saren checked his weapon, a sleek blaster he had pulled from his jacket. "My contact is just ahead," he said. "Once we hand Kaleth over, you are free to go." They rounded the corner and stopped. The hangar bay was not empty. It was filled with soldiers in gray armor, the Meridian blade. And in the center of the room, Saren's contact was on his knees, a blaster pressed to the back of his head. A tall woman with a severe, scarred face stood over him. She wore the insignia of a commander. She looked up as Mara and Saren appeared. "Right on time. Mr. Cade," the commander said smoothly. "We were worried you had gotten lost." Saren cursed under his breath. He shoved the grav sled behind a stack of crates and pulled Mara down with him just as the air filled with laser fire. Red bolts sizzled against the metal floor. Mara covered her head, the smell of burnt ozone stinging her nose. "This was not in the brochure," she yelled over the noise. Saren fired 2 shots back, dropping a soldier who tried to flank them. "I will update the job description. They were pinned down. There was no way to get the dragon to the ship, and no way to go back the way they came without being shot in the back." Mara looked at the container. The dragon inside was stirring. The humming in her bones grew louder, sharper. It felt like a migraine onsetting. "We cannot hold them off," Mara said. Saren looked at her. His face was grim. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a data drive. "Mara, take this. What is it?" "Encryption keys, flight paths. Everything I know about the blade. Why are you giving this to me? Because one of us has to fly the dragon out of here. And you are the better pilot." Mara stared at him. "You are going to surrender?" "I am going to provide a distraction," Saren said. He looked at her, and for a moment, the adrenaline faded. His eyes dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes. The air between them crackled, charged with something that had nothing to do with laser fire. It was a pull, a recognition. He leaned in, and Mara thought he was going to kiss her. She wanted him to. It was a stupid, reckless impulse in the middle of a firefight, but she leaned in too. He stopped inches from her face. "Get him safe. Mara." He turned and vaulted over the crates, firing his weapon and shouting at the commander, "Hey, ugly, over here!" The soldiers turned their fire toward Saren. He sprinted toward the far side of the hangar, drawing them away from the maintenance corridor. Mara did not hesitate. She grabbed the handle of the grav sled and shoved it hard. She sprinted back down the hallway, the heavy container floating beside her. She could hear the shouts and the heavy thud of boots behind her. They had seen her. She reached the airlock where the rusty needle was docked. She jammed the release button. The door slid open. She shoved the container inside and scrambled into the pilot's seat. As she fired the engines, a warning light flashed on the console. Hull breach imminent. A squad of soldiers burst into the airlock. They fired at the cockpit glass. A web of cracks appeared. Mara punched the throttle. The magnetic clamps disengaged, and the skiff dropped away from the station like a stone. She spun the ship, igniting the main thrusters. The G-force slammed her into the seat. She was away, but the station's defense turrets were tracking her. She dove into the debris field of the low-orbit junk lanes. Twisted metal hulks of old cruisers floated everywhere. It was a graveyard of ships, and now, her only cover. She weaved through the wreckage, lasers splashing against the debris around her. She was breathing hard, her hands shaking on the controls. She was alone. Saren was gone. She had a mythical monster in her cargo hold and an army on her tail. Suddenly, a voice spoke in her mind. When it was not a human voice, it was a sound like tectonic plates shifting, deep and resonant. Small star. Mara gasped, gripping the controls. "Who is that? Turn left." The command was absolute. Mara yanked the yoke to the left, banking hard around the husk of a freighter. A second later, a turbo laser blast disintegrated the space where she had just been. Mara looked back toward the cargo hold. The dragon. Calith. The connection slammed into her. For a second, she was not in the cockpit. She was standing in a vast crystalline hall. A throne made of white light sat in the center. She saw herself sitting on it, but she looked different, taller, her skin glowing, her eyes strange. She felt a crushing weight of responsibility, a sadness that spanned centuries. Then the vision snapped. She was back in the cockpit, the collision alarm screaming. She leveled the ship. The Meridian Blade fighters were closing in. 3 interceptors, fast and lethal. They were going to catch her. She could not outrun them in this junker. She looked at the sensor display. The interceptors were in a tight formation. Mara realized something cold and clear. She was nobody. A mechanic from a scrap moon. If she died, the universe would not blink. But if they caught the dragon, if they cut him up and put him in a computer, millions would suffer. Saren had believed that. She checked the fuel. 5%. She could not escape, but she could make sure they did not get the prize. She opened the comm channel to the cargo hold. "Hey, lizard," she said, her voice trembling. "If you can hear me, hang on." She scanned the debris field. There was a massive, unstable reactor core floating in the center of the junk lane, a remnant of a capital ship war from 50 years ago. It was leaking radiation. If she hit it, the explosion would be blinding. It would hide a smaller thermal signature, like an escape pod launching. Mara programmed the autopilot to ram the reactor core. Then she rigged the cargo hold's emergency jettison. She was going to launch the dragon into the deep dark of the asteroid belt while she drew their fire. It was suicide. It was madness. It was the only play she had. She armed the sequence. "Good luck, Saren," she whispered. She engaged the thrusters to maximum burn and turned the ship directly toward the reactor. The interceptors followed her, taking the bait. Mara Quinn smiled, a sharp, terrified grin. "Here we go." She hit the button. The cargo hold hissed, and the black container shot away into the shadows of space. Silent and dark. A heartbeat later, Mara's ship slammed into the reactor core. White light swallowed the world. The explosion of the reactor core had bought them exactly 12 minutes of lead time. It had been enough for Saren to swing his stolen shuttle around, grapple Mara's ejection pod from the debris field, and burn hard for the outer rim currents before the Meridian Blade reinforcements arrived to sift through the radioactive dust. Now, 3 days later, safety felt like a cruel joke. They were currently passengers on a bulk hauler named the Gilded Rat, a ship that smelled aggressively of fermented algae and unwashed flight suits. They were skipping across a chain of outlaw refueling nodes, staying off the grid, moving deeper into the lawless zones where the Empire's sensor net was more suggestion than law. Mara sat on a crate in the cargo hold. watching their hosts with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. The captain of the vessel was a massive, scarred humanoid named Vorian. He and his crew, a ragtag collection of deserters and scrapmongers, were currently gathered around Calith's containment unit. They were not inspecting it for damage. They were praying. "Oh, great scaled one," Vorian rumbled, pressing his forehead against the cold black metal. "We offer you this humble tribute of synthetic fuel cells. Bless our hyperdrive. Keep the customs drones blind." One of the crew members, a small creature with oversized goggles, placed a bowl of rehydrated Fruit Loops on top of the container. A sacred offering. Mara looked at Saren, who was leaning against the bulkhead, arms crossed, watching the scene with a pained expression. "They think he is a god," Mara whispered. Saren rubbed the bridge of his nose. "It is a fringe belief in the outer sectors. The cult of the star worm. They believe dragons are the cosmic saints of luck. When I told them what was in the box to get passage, I did not expect a religious revival. At least they are not charging us credits," Mara muttered. Vorian stood up, wiping grease from his tunic. He beamed at them, revealing a mouth full of chrome teeth. "The saint is quiet today," Vorian said reverently. "Is he pleased?" "He is resting," Saren said quickly. "Deep meditation. He requires absolute silence and no inspections by Imperial patrols. That is his first commandment." Vorian nodded solemnly. "The saint hates the tax collectors. We understand." The ship shuddered as it dropped out of warp space. They had arrived at another node, a rusting lattice of docking clamps floating in the shadow of a gas giant. "We are stopping for coolant," Vorian announced. "Do not leave the ship. The news feeds are ugly." When the crew dispersed to handle the refueling, Mara and Saren retreated to the small, cramped cabin they had been sharing. It was barely large enough for a single bunk, let alone 2 people. The walls were thin, vibrating with the constant thrum of the engine. Saren activated the small hollow projector on the wall. The image flickered to life, showing a jagged, distorted feed of the Imperial News Network. Mara's breath hitched. Her face was on the screen. It was a grainy image taken from her driver's license, looking younger and less tired. Next to a high-resolution security capture of Saren fighting in the hangar. The headline scrolled in bold crimson letters. "Terrorist cell responsible for Vera 9 reactor meltdown. Wanted dead or alive. Reward, 500,000 credits." 500,000, Mara said, her voice hollow. "I am worth more dead than I ever made alive." "They are spinning the narrative," Saren said, his eyes scanning the scrolling text. "They are blaming the reactor explosion on us. They claim we sabotaged the station to kill civilians." Mara looked away from the screen. She had seen the poverty on the worlds they had passed, the refueling nodes where children begged for water credits, the mining colonies where men worked 16-hour shifts for script that was worthless off-world. And now, the Empire was using her face to distract them, to give them a villain so they would not look at the empty tables in their own homes. "It works," she said bitterly. "Look at the comments. They hate us. They think we are monsters." Saren reached out and turned off the projector. The room plunged back into shadows, lit only by the amber glow of the standby lights. "Do not look at it," he said softly. Mara looked up at him. He was standing close, the cramped space forcing an intimacy they had been dancing around for days. He looked tired. The bandage on his side was fresh, but he moved with a stiffness that told her he was still in pain. "Who are you?" "Really?" Mara asked. "You knew how to fly that shuttle like you were born in a cockpit. You handle a blaster better than the guild enforcers. And you know more about dragons than the imperial xenobiologists. Saren hesitated. He sat down on the edge of the bunk, the metal frame groaning under his weight. He looked at his hands, calloused, scarred, steady. 20 years ago, there was a program, he began, his voice low. The Ether Vanguard. It was not public knowledge. The old Emperor wanted to integrate the dragons into the fleet, not just as beasts of burden, but as partners. Mara stared at him. You were a pilot? I was a bond candidate, Saren corrected. They took us young. We were screened for high neural plasticity, high empathy levels. The theory was that a dragon does not obey commands. It responds to intent. You cannot steer them with a joystick. You have to think the destination, and they take you there. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I was one of 12 candidates who successfully linked with a hatchling. It was indescribable. It was like having a second sun ignite in your mind. You are never alone. You are part of something vast. What happened? Mara asked. The current regime happened, Saren said. Chancellor Vale and the Meridian Blade. They decided that partners were too dangerous. They wanted tools. They purged the program, killed the dragons, arrested the pilots. I was off-world on a training run when the order came down. I ran. I have been running ever since. He gestured toward the door, toward the cargo hold where Kalith slept. When I heard rumors of a surviving dragon, a promised dragon, I knew I had to act. If the Blade figures out how to force a link, how to enslave a mind that powerful, the war is over. They will rewrite reality. Mara sat beside him. The space between them on the narrow mattress was charged, magnetic. So you are a failed pilot and I am a mechanic with a bounty, she said. We are a hell of a team. Saren turned to her. A faint smile touched his lips. It made him look younger, less like a ghost of a dead program. You flew that skiff into a reactor core to save a creature you had met an hour before, he said. You are the bravest person I have ever met. Mara Quinn. The air in the cabin seemed to thin. Mara could feel the heat radiating from him. The fear of the last few days, the adrenaline, the exhaustion. It all seemed to crystallize into a singular, sharp need. She did not want to be brave. She wanted to be held. She wanted to know that for 5 minutes. She was not just a target. She reached out and touched the side of his face. His skin was rough, warm. We might not make it to the next system, she whispered. I know, Saren said. He leaned in, and this time, there was no laser fire to interrupt them. The kiss was slow, tentative at first, a question asked in the dark. Then Mara's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, and the question became an answer. It was not the desperate, frantic collision of the bar fight. It was a grounding, a claiming. They moved together with a clumsy, honest urgency. Clothes were discarded, landing on the cold metal floor. Skin met skin, seeking warmth in the vacuum. It was not a performance of romance. It was a sharing of burdens. Every touch was a reassurance that they were still alive, still human, despite the galaxy trying to turn them into myths or corpses. Later, in the quiet dark, Mara lay with her head on Saren's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His arm was draped over her, protective and heavy. Neither of them spoke. There were no promises of forever, no declarations that would ring false in the morning light. There was only the hum of the engine and the shared, silent agreement that whatever came next, they would face it together. The peace did not last. 2 days later, the condition of the cargo changed. Mara was in the hold, checking the seals on the container when she heard a sound from inside. It was a low, distressed warble, like a whale song pitched up into a scream. "Saren!" she yelled. He was there in seconds, sliding down the ladder. He rushed to the container and threw open the inspection hatch. Inside, Kaleth was thrashing. The deep, cosmic black of his scales had dulled to a chalky gray. The iridescence was gone. His breathing was shallow and ragged, rattling in his chest. "What is happening?" Mara asked, panic rising in her throat. Saren placed his hand on the dragon's flank. He winced, pulling his hand back. He is freezing. His internal thermal reaction is failing. "Is he sick?" "He is starving," Saren said grimly. "Not for food, for stellar radiation. Dragons feed on the emissions of young stars. We have been keeping him in the dark, in stasis, for too long. His reserves are gone. If we do not get him to a source, he will die." "We are in the middle of nowhere," Mara said. "The nearest star is a red dwarf. It is dying. It would not be enough anyway," Saren said. "He needs a stellar cradle, a concentrated fusion matrix. It is the only thing that can jumpstart his metabolism." "Where do we get one of those?" Mara asked. Saren looked at her, and she saw the dread in his eyes. "There is only one place in this sector that has that kind of technology," he said. "The Imperial capital. The Royal Shipyard." Mara stared at him. "You want to take the dragon back to the people who are trying to steal him?" "It is the only way," Saren said. "The shipyard has a dry dock for dreadnoughts. They use artificial stellar cores to test the shields. If we can get him into the core chamber for 10 minutes, he will recover. And if we get caught, we are dead," Mara said. "If we do nothing, he dies," Saren countered. "And if he dies, the blade wins anyway." Mara looked at the suffering creature. The empathic link she had felt before was weak now, a faint, static-filled cry of pain in the back of her mind. It hurt to look at him. She squared her shoulders. "How do we get into the most heavily guarded system in the galaxy?" The plan was madness, which meant it was right up their alley. They used the last of Saren's encryption codes to forge a transponder signal for the Gilded Rat, identifying it as a waste-hauling contractor for the Imperial Palace. Vorian and his crew, terrified by the prospect of entering the capital but equally terrified of a dragon dying on their watch, bad luck of the highest order, agreed to fly them to the outer perimeter. The capital system was a blinding jewel of civilization. The planet itself, Ethelgard, was a blue-green marble surrounded by 3 rings of orbital stations, defense platforms, and luxury habitats. It was beautiful and terrifying. Mara piloted the shuttle they had stolen from the smugglers, a small, nondescript utility craft. Saren was in the co-pilot seat, his fingers flying over the keypad, spoofing their clearance codes. Kaleth's container was strapped into the back, humming with the last reserves of the portable power cells they had scavenged. "Approach vector confirmed," Saren said, sweat beading on his forehead. "They are buying the waste hauler disguise. We are cleared for the lower orbital docks." Mara guided the ship through the traffic. It was thick here. Pleasure yachts, military cruisers, diplomatic couriers. They were a speck of rust in a sea of chrome. They docked at Station 4, a massive cathedral-like structure that served as the primary shipyard for the royal fleet. The architecture was oppressive, vaulted ceilings of transparent aluminum, statues of the Emperor 50 feet tall, banners of gold and white hanging from every stanchion. They unloaded the container onto a maglev cart. They wore stolen maintenance uniforms. Grease smeared on their faces to obscure their features. "Keep your head down," Saren whispered. "Walk like you belong here. Walk like you are underpaid and bored." They pushed the cart through the vast, echoing corridors. The station was busy. Officers in crisp uniforms marched past, ignoring the two grimy workers pushing a crate. They reached the service lift that led to the core chamber. Saren hacked the panel, his movements precise. The doors slid open. So far, so good. Mara breathed. Too good, Saren murmured. They descended into the bowels of the station. The air grew hotter here, smelling of ozone and ionized metal. They reached the core chamber, a circular room dominated by a viewing port that looked directly into a containment field holding a raging, miniature sun. "This is it," Saren said. They pushed the cart toward the access port. Saren began the sequence to open the container. Suddenly, the lights in the chamber turned red. A siren wailed, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through Mara's nerves. The main doors at the far end of the chamber hissed open. A dozen soldiers in the black armor of the Imperial Guard marched in, weapons raised. Behind them walked a man in a white silk suit. He was slight, elegant, with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Chancellor Vale, I must admit," Vale said, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. "I did not think you would actually be foolish enough to come here. Desperation makes people so predictable." Saren stepped in front of Mara, his hand going to his blaster. "Vale." "Saren Cade," the Chancellor said, shaking his head. "The prodigal pilot and the little mechanic from the scrap heap. You have caused me a great deal of paperwork." "How did you know?" Saren demanded. Vale tapped his temple. "The dragon, my dear boy. We have been tracking his empathic distress signals since you entered the system. He is screaming for help. We just had to wait for you to bring him to the dinner table." Vale gestured, and the soldiers advanced. "Surrender the creature," Vale said, "and I will make your deaths quick. Resist, and I will let the scientists practice their vivisection techniques on you before we move on to the dragon." Mara looked at the control panel next to her. It controlled the blast shields for the stellar core. If she opened the shields, the radiation would flood the room. It would feed Kalith instantly. It would also likely fry everyone standing there without heavy shielding. Saren looked at her. He saw where her hand was hovering. He looked at the soldiers closing in. There were too many. "Mara," Saren said, his voice calm. "Get Kalith into the launch tube." "What?" Mara asked. There was a secondary emergency ejection tube for hazardous waste right next to the core access. "I am going to buy you time," Saren said. "No," Mara said, "not again." "We do this together, not this time," Saren said. He moved faster than the soldiers expected. He drew his blaster and fired, not at the soldiers, but at the coolant pipes running along the ceiling. Steam exploded into the room, a blinding white fog. "Go!" Saren roared, diving into the mist, firing blindly at the guards. Mara grabbed the cart. She shoved it toward the launch tube. The steam was scalding, the noise deafening. Laser fire zipped past her ear. She reached the tube. She slammed the container inside and hit the cycle button. The airlock cycled. Kalith was safe, loaded into the chute. She turned to grab Saren. She saw him through the mist. He was on his knees. Two guards had him pinned. Vale was standing over him, a pistol in his hand. Mara froze. She was 10 feet away, hidden by a plume of steam. She had a clear path to the second launch pod, a worker escape sphere. If she stayed, she would be captured. She could not fight 12 guards. If she ran, she could follow Kalith. She could save the dragon, but she would be leaving Saren to the knife. The choice tore at her chest, a physical pain sharper than any wound. Saren looked up. His eyes found her through the fog. He shook his head slightly. A silent command. "Go." Mara grit her teeth Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the grease and sweat. She slammed her hand onto the launch control for the escape sphere. She scrambled inside as the door hissed shut. Through the viewport, she saw Vale raise his pistol. She saw Saren close his eyes. Then the launch thrusters fired, and the G-force slammed her back, ripping her away from the only person who had ever understood her. She shot out into the cold silence of space, following the dragon's pod, leaving her heart bleeding on the docking bay floor. She had chosen the mission. She had chosen the future, and she hated herself for it. The steam in the orbital dock was thick enough to drown in, a blinding white fog that smelled of burning coolant and ozone. Mara Quinn stood by the open airlock of the escape sphere, her hand hovering over the internal release panel. The roar of the station's alarms was deafening, a physical weight pressing against her chest. In the previous second, the instinct to survive had been overwhelming. She had wanted to scramble into that pod, to curl up next to the dragon's container and shoot away into the dark, safe and anonymous. She had imagined the silence of space, the G-force slamming her back, the relief of living. But the diagnostic screen on the outer console flashed a single, lethal error. Launch trajectory obstructed, manual clearance required. If she got in, the pod would never leave the tube. It would sit there until Vale's guards burned through the hull. Kalith would be taken. The promise would be broken. Mara looked back through the swirling mist. She could hear the distinct snap hiss of laser fire. Saren was still out there, fighting a dozen men to buy her time. He thought she was leaving. He thought he was dying to save her life. She looked at the dragon's container, wedged tight into the small sphere. Through the viewport, she saw the faint, iridescent shimmer of scales. She made the choice in the space between two heartbeats. It was not a decision made of bravery, but of simple, brutal mathematics. One pod, one blockade, two lives, but only one that could save the galaxy. Mara slammed her hand onto the external override. The magnetic clamps disengaged with a heavy metallic thud. The blast door hissed shut, sealing Kalith inside. "Fly, you beautiful monster," she whispered. She punched the launch sequence. The pod fired its thrusters, screaming down the launch tube and punching a hole through the magnetic shielding of the station. Mara was thrown back by the recoil, landing hard on the grating. She was alone on the dock. The pod was gone. She scrambled to her feet, her ears ringing. The fog was beginning to clear as the station's ventilation systems kicked into overdrive. She saw the squad of Imperial guards advancing across the floor, their black armor gleaming under the emergency strobes. And she saw Saren. He was pinned behind a cargo loader, firing wildly. He looked toward the launch tube, then back to the empty space where Mara should have been. He saw her standing there. The look on his face broke her heart faster than any laser bolt could. It was a mixture of absolute horror and shattering realization. He screamed her name, but the sound was swallowed by the klaxons. Chancellor Vale stepped through the ranks of his soldiers. He looked at the empty launch tube, then at Mara. His elegant, thin face twisted into a mask of pure reptilian rage. "You," Vale said, his voice cold enough to freeze the steam. "You sent the creature away." "I sent the future away," Mara said. She was shaking, her hands trembling violently, but she locked her knees and stood her ground. "You just got the courier." Vale adjusted the cuffs of his white suit. He tapped his comm link. "Command, this is Chancellor Vale. The extraction has failed. Initiate Protocol 0. The voice that came back was robotic. "Protocol 0 confirmed. Containment collapse in 30 seconds. Saren broke cover. He did not care about the laser fire anymore. He sprinted toward Mara, moving with a desperate, fluid speed. Vale turned to leave, his guards forming a protective phalanx around him as they retreated toward the heavy blast doors. "Burn it all," Vale said over his shoulder. "Leave no witnesses." The station shuddered. It was not an explosion, but a groan of structural failure. Protocol Zero was not a self-destruct sequence. It was a containment collapse. The magnetic fields holding the station's artificial stellar core, the miniature sun used for testing dreadnought shields, were being lowered. Within 20 seconds, the solar radiation would flood the station. It would vaporize organic matter instantly. But worse, without the dampening fields, the resulting thermal bloom would incinerate the civilian habitats in the lower rings and likely catch Calith's pod before it reached the safe zone. Mara looked at the core chamber control console 10 meters away. She ran. She slid across the polished floor, dodging a stray laser blast from the retreating guards, and slammed into the console. Her fingers flew across the interface. Warning. Core shielding failing. Thermal expansion imminent. She had to redirect the blast. She had to force the magnetic aperture to vent the energy upward, away from the civilian rings and away from the launch vector. It required a manual override. It required 2 hands and a complete bypass of the safety protocols. "Mara, no!" Saren slammed into her, grabbing her shoulders. His face was bloodied, his eyes wide and frantic. "We have to go. The service tunnels. We can make the lower hangar. There is no time." "Saren!" Mara shouted, shoving him back. She keyed in the final sequence. "If I do not vent this, the blast kills the pod. It kills everyone in the habitat rings." Saren looked at the screen, then at the blinding light building behind the glass steel of the core chamber. He understood. He was a pilot. He knew the physics of a star. "Then I am staying," he said. He gripped her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers on the console. "You can't." Mara sobbed. She looked at him, memorizing the sharp line of his jaw, the desperate blue of his eyes. "Someone has to make sure the dragon survives. Someone has to find him." She leaned up and kissed him. It was salty with tears and blood, a desperate collision of life in the face of death. "Find him, Saren," she whispered against his lips. "Promise me." She shoved him, hard. She hit the emergency seal on the blast door between them. A sheet of transparent durasteel slammed down, separating them. Saren pounded on the glass, screaming soundlessly. Mara turned her back on him. She could not look. If she looked, she would try to open the door. She grabbed the manual levers of the core regulator. They were hot, burning her palms. Override confirmed. The wall of the core chamber dissolved. The light did not come all at once. It started as a hum, a vibration that rattled her teeth. Then the heat hit her, a wave of 3,000 degrees. Mara grit her teeth and pulled the levers down, forcing the magnetic field to shape the explosion, to funnel it up and out. Her vision went white at the edges. Her skin felt like it was blistering. In that final second, as her body began to fail, the pain vanished. The roar of the dying station faded into a profound, heavy silence. A voice spoke in her mind. It was not a voice of words, but of tectonic movement, of ancient starlight and deep gravity. Brave small star. It was Calith. The presence washed over her, cool and vast. It felt like sinking into a deep ocean. She saw a flash of an image, a throne made of singing crystal, a crown that weighed like a planet, a future where she stood tall and terrible and beautiful. "Sleep now," the dragon said. "The debt is recorded." Mara Quinn smiled. She closed her eyes. The station bloomed. The explosion was a flower of pure fusion fire, a silent, blinding eruption that shattered the orbital dock. A column of white light pierced the dark of the system, venting harmlessly into the void, missing the civilian rings by a margin of 4 kilometers. Far below, In the tumbling darkness of the asteroid belt, a black pod drifted safely away, carried on the wake of the shockwave and in the service tunnel. Serencade watched the monitor go static and felt the connection to the only thing that had mattered in 20 years sever with the brutality of a guillotine. He did not scream. He simply slid down the wall, the heat of the blast warming the metal against his back, and stared into the dark. Time did not heal. Time eroded. 20 years was enough time for a child to grow into a soldier. It was enough time for a lie to become history. The Empire did not fall. It calcified. Under the guidance of Chancellor Vale, now Grand Archon Vale, the systems were brought to heel with terrifying efficiency. The narrative of the Vera 9 terrorists became a staple of school curriculums. Mara Quinn and Serencade were painted as anarchists who had detonated a stellar core to kill thousands. The truth of the saved civilians was buried under redactions. But legends are stubborn weeds. In the outer rim, whispers began to spread. They spoke of a ghost ship, a modified interceptor painted matte black, flown by a pilot who never spoke and never missed. They called him the Pale Pilot. He struck Imperial convoys, sabotaged supply lines, and vanished before the reinforcements arrived. He was looking for something, or someone. And there were other whispers, rumors of a shadow in the void, a creature that ate stars and left silence in its wake. The cult of the star worm grew from a fringe superstition into a galaxy-wide underground religion. They prayed to the promised dragon, and they prayed to the martyr of the dock, the girl who had turned the fire away. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It took 2 decades for the echo to finally hit the ground. The first sensation was cold. It was a sterile, chemical cold that seeped into the marrow. Then came the light. It was too bright, too clinical. Mara gasped, her lungs expanding with a painful, wet crackle. The air tasted wrong. It tasted filtered, expensive, recycled through diamond filters. She tried to sit up, but her body felt heavy, disconnected, as if she were operating a machine she had not read the manual for. Careful. Your Highness, muscle atrophy is minimal, but disorienting. The voice was smooth, cultured, and unfamiliar. Mara blinked, her vision swimming into focus. She was lying on a bio-bed in a room that looked more like a cathedral than a hospital. The walls were white marble, inlaid with gold circuitry. Floating medical drones hovered silently above her. She looked at her hands. She screamed. These were not her hands. Her hands were small, scarred, stained with grease and engine oil. The fingernails were usually bitten short. The hands resting on the silk sheets were long, elegant, and pale. The skin shimmered with a faint bioluminescent luster. The fingers were slender, ending in manicured nails that looked like glass. And on the inside of the wrist, pulsing with a soft blue light, was a complex geometric tattoo, a genetic sigil. "Get it off!" Mara shouted, scrambling backward. Her voice was different too, deeper, more resonant, carrying a harmonic undertone that human vocal cords could not produce. She thrashed, tangling in the sheets. Her legs moved with a power she did not recognize. She was taller. Much taller. Calm yourself, Empress. The sedative is still metabolizing. A face appeared above her. It was an old man, human, wearing the crimson robes of the imperial physician. He had eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. "Where is Saren?" Mara demanded, clutching the strange alien chest that was now hers. "Where's the station? The core?" "I vented the core." The physician tilted his head, studying her with clinical fascination. "That was 20 years ago, my dear." Mara froze. The room spun. 20 years? "You suffered a catastrophic event," the physician said, tapping a datapad. Your body was destroyed, but your consciousness that was preserved. Salvaged. It has been a complex process to reconstruct a vessel worthy of you. Vessel? Mara looked down at herself. She was wearing a gown of spun silver. Her body was perfect, statuesque, terrifying. She felt the strength coiling in her muscles, a biological potency that was not human. "What did you do to me?" she whispered. "We gave you your birthright," the physician said. He held up a mirror. Mara looked. The face staring back was not Mara Quinn. It was a face of haunting, alien beauty, high cheekbones, skin like moonlight, eyes that were pools of violet with no pupils. It was the face of a Solari, the ancient royal bloodline that the Empire had supposedly extinguished centuries ago. "You are Elira Solari," the physician said softly, "the Empress of the galaxy." "No," Mara said, shaking her head. "I am Mara. I am a mechanic. I died." "Yes," the physician said. And then he smiled, a thin, chilling expression that made the cold in the room seem tropical. "You died protecting the promised dragon," he said. "And you woke as Empress of the galaxy. It is a poetic symmetry, is it not?" He leaned in closer. "Your memories are a side effect, a grafting error. You must learn to suppress them. The galaxy does not need a dead mechanic. It needs a symbol." The doors to the sanctum opened. 2 lines of royal guards marched in, slamming their halberds against the floor in unison. "The council awaits, Your Majesty," the physician said. "The balcony is prepared. The people have been told you have awakened from your long convalescence. They are waiting to see their ruler." "I can't," Mara whispered. "You must," the physician said, "or the treatment ends. And without the treatments, this body fails in 12 hours. He offered her his hand. Mara looked at the alien hand, then at the guard, then at the reflection in the mirror. Saren was gone. Kalith was gone. She was trapped in a nightmare of gold and marble, wearing a body that had been grown in a tank. But she was alive. And if she was alive, she could fight. She took the physician's hand. The walk to the balcony felt like a funeral procession. Servants bowed as she passed, their foreheads touching the floor. They were terrified of her. She could smell their fear. Her new senses were razor sharp, picking up pheromones and heartbeats. They draped a heavy cloak of velvet and void fur over her shoulders. They placed a crown on her head, a band of platinum that hummed with a low-frequency containment field. It felt like a shackle. She stepped out onto the balcony. The noise hit her like a physical blow. Below, the Imperial Plaza stretched for miles, a canyon of steel and light. It was packed with millions of people. Drones flew overhead, projecting her image onto the clouds, her new face, 10 kilometers high. When they saw her, the roar began. It was a sound of desperation, of fanaticism, of a galaxy starved for hope. "Hail the Empress! Hail Elira!" Mara gripped the railing. The stone crumbled slightly under her fingers. She had crushed it without meaning to. The strength in this body was terrifying. She looked out at the sea of faces. They did not know who she was. They did not know she was a girl who liked grease under her fingernails and cheap synthale. They saw a goddess. She felt a wave of dizziness. The lights were too bright. The noise was too loud. She looked up at the sky, at the black void between the stars. Somewhere out there, a dragon was flying. Somewhere out there, a pilot was hunting. "I am here," she thought, projecting the thought with all the force of her new, alien mind. "I am here, and I remember." She raised her hand. The crowd screamed their adoration. Mara Quinn stood in the skin of an empress, and for the first time in 20 years, she began to plan a war. The gown weighed 30 pounds. It was constructed from woven biofiber and crushed gemstones, designed to catch the light of the triple suns and turn the Empress into a blinding pillar of authority. To Mara Quinn, who had spent her first life in grease-stained coveralls that weighed nothing and protected her from everything, the gown felt like a coffin. She stood in front of the obsidian mirror in her private chambers, holding her breath. The reflection that stared back was breathtaking and terrifying. Aelira Solari was 7 feet tall, her skin the color of starlight on water, her eyes violet voids that saw too much. The genetic sigils on her wrists pulsed with a slow, rhythmic blue light, syncing with the heartbeat of the palace's security grid. "Your posture is still too aggressive, Your Majesty." The voice belonged to High Tutor Corvus, a protocol droid with a voice synthesized to sound like a disappointed grandfather. "You stand like you are bracing for an impact," Corvus continued, adjusting the hem of her dress with spindly metal fingers. "An Empress does not brace. An Empress flows. The galaxy moves around you, not the other way around." "I am just trying not to trip," Aelira said. Her voice was a rich contralto, vibrating in her chest. It still surprised her every time she spoke. "Tripping is forbidden," Corvus said dryly. "Now, lift your chin. The council is waiting." Mara closed her eyes for a second. Inside the alien architecture of her new brain, she was screaming. She was a mechanic from a junk moon. She knew how to bypass a hyperdrive compressor with a roll of duct tape. She did not know how to rule a galactic empire that spanned 12 sectors and 3 trillion souls. But she had no choice. She was Aelira now. The doctors had explained it as a miracle. The data stream she had secretly accessed during her sleepless nights explained it as a crime. She opened her eyes. The violet voids sharpened. "Let them wait," she said. "Anticipation breeds respect." She swept past the droid, the heavy gown rustling like dry leaves. She walked with the predatory grace her new physiology granted her, moving toward the council chamber. She was not just learning to walk. She was learning to hunt. The council chamber was a circle of floating platforms suspended over a pit of churning holographic data. 5 individuals sat there, the architects of the current regime. At the head sat Grand Archon Vale. 20 years had been kind to him, likely due to expensive gene therapy. He looked almost exactly as he had the day he murdered her in the orbital dock, smooth, pale, reptilian. He wore white silk and a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Empress," Vale said, bowing his head slightly. The gesture was mocking in its minimalism. "We are relieved you could join us. There are matters of state that require your signature." He emphasized the word signature as if she were nothing more than an auto pen with a pulse. Aelira stepped onto her central platform. It rose to hover above them. "I have been reviewing the supply chain reports for the Outer Rim," Aelira said, ignoring his opening gambit. "Why are we taxing the oxygen recyclers in the Thraxis sector at 40%? That is unsustainable. The miners will suffocate or revolt, or..." Vale exchanged a glance with General Krell, a massive cyborg who commanded the fleet. "Sustainability is a secondary concern to security," Vale said smoothly. "The Thraxis sector is a hotbed of insurrection. The tax pays for the garrison that keeps them safe." "Safe from whom?" Aelira asked. "From themselves," Vale said. "And from the terrorists who worship false idols." He tapped a control on his armrest. A holographic image materialized in the center of the room. It was a tactical report. A grain depot on a border world had been bombed. A convoy of munitions had been hijacked. The Pale Pilot strikes again. General Krell rumbled. His voice sounded like grinding gears. "He is becoming a problem. Archon." The peasantry calls him a ghost. He is a man, Vale said dismissively, and men bleed, which brings us to the good news. The hologram shifted. It showed a grainy security feed from a black site prison. A figure was being dragged down a corridor by two heavy combat droids. We caught him, Vale said. Elira felt the blood drain from her face, a sensation that felt like ice water in her new veins. The figure in the feed was older. His hair was gray at the temples. A jagged scar ran from his ear to his jaw. He limped, favoring his left leg. But the eyes, bright, defiant, furious blue, were unchanged. Saren, he was alive. For 20 years, she had been dead, and he had been fighting. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out by grief and filled back up with shrapnel. He attempted to sabotage the primary communication array on Luna 7. Vale said. He walked into a trap. We have him in the lower detention block. Elira gripped the arms of her throne. The stone cracked audibly under her fingers. The council turned to look at her. Vale raised an eyebrow. Your Majesty? Elira forced her hands to relax. She forced her heart rate to slow, using the biofeedback controls she had discovered in her new nervous system. He is a significant prize, she said, her voice steady. He is a symbol of chaos, Vale corrected. We must execute him immediately. A public broadcast. It will break the spirit of the rebellion. It will show the galaxy that the Empress tolerates no dissent. No, Elira said. The room went silent. Vale's smile vanished. I beg your pardon. If he is a symbol, then making him a martyr only makes him stronger, Elira said. She leaned forward, improvising, channeling every ounce of imperial arrogance she had studied. You do not kill a legend, Chancellor. You dismantle it. You prove he is just a man. I want to interrogate him. I want to know his network. I want to break him before we end him. Krell grunted. We have interrogators for that. Droids with knives. And they lack subtlety, Elira countered. This man was a Dragon Bond candidate once. His mind is disciplined. Droids will not work. I will do it. Vale studied her. He was looking for the crack, for the weakness. He saw only the violet eyes of a monster he thought he had created. Very well, Vale said slowly. But do not take too long. Empress. The execution is scheduled for dawn. The detention block smelled of ozone and despair. Elira dismissed the guards at the door to cell block 4. Leave us, she commanded. Disable the audio recording. I need him to feel safe if he is to talk. The guard captain hesitated, then bowed and retreated. Elira stood before the blast door. She took a breath that filled her massive lungs. Then she keyed the entry code. The door slid open. Saren was chained to a chair in the center of the room. He had been beaten. His flight jacket was torn, revealing the old bandages and new bruises. He looked up as she entered, and his expression was one of pure, unadulterated hatred. So, he rasped, his voice rough with thirst. They sent the puppet to watch the show. Elira stepped inside. The door hissed shut behind her. She looked at him. Really looked at him. The lines around his eyes were new. The way he held his shoulders was tighter. He carried the weight of a war she had started. Hello. Saren, she said softly. Saren spat on the floor near her feet. Save the speech, Empress. I know what you are. You are Vale's masterpiece. A lab experiment in a pretty dress. You are half right, she said. She walked around him. He tensed, expecting a blow. You were always reckless, she said. Trying to sabotage a comm array with only 2 thermal detonators. That was sloppy. Saren froze. He turned his head, tracking her. How do you know what I had? Because it is exactly the kind of stupid, heroic thing you would do, she said. Like trying to fight 3 guild enforcers in a bar when you are already bleeding from a gut wound. Saren went very still. The defiance in his eyes flickered, replaced by confusion. What did you say? Illyra stopped in front of him. She leaned down, bringing her alien, luminous face level with his. You owe me 50 credits, Saren Cade, she whispered. And a high-grade alloy spanner. Saren stared at her. His breath caught in his throat. He looked at her eyes, violet, alien, wrong. But behind them, he saw something. A tilt of the head, a sharpness. That is impossible, he breathed. She is dead. I watched the station burn. She made a choice, Illyra said, her voice cracking. She vented the core to save the dragon. She died so you could live. Saren pulled against the chains, the metal rattling violently. Who are you? What kind of sick mind game is this? Did Vale download her memories into you, is that it? You are wearing her ghost like a costume. I am her, Illyra shouted. She reached up and tore the heavy platinum crown from her head, throwing it across the room. It clattered against the wall. I woke up 3 weeks ago in a tank, she said, the tears finally spilling over, burning hot on her cheeks. I do not know how. I do not know why. But I remember the smell of the hydraulic fluid on Vera 9. I remember the way your hand felt when we hid in that alley. I remember the last thing I said to you before I locked that door. Saren was shaking. Tears were cutting tracks through the grime on his face. What did you say? He whispered. Tell me. Illyra closed her eyes. Find him. Saren. Promise me. The silence in the cell was absolute. Saren slumped in the chair. He looked at her, and the hatred was gone, replaced by a devastation so profound it hurt to witness. Mara? He asked. It's me, she said. I look different. I know. Saren laughed. It was a broken, jagged sound. Different? You are a 7-foot-tall Empress of the apocalypse. You are. I am a monster, she finished. No, Saren said. He looked at her hands, the dangerous, clawed elegance of them. He leaned forward as much as the chains would allow. Come here, he said. Illyra hesitated. She was afraid she would break him. She was afraid her touch was poison. Come here, he repeated firmly. She stepped closer. She reached out and touched his face. Her skin was cool, smooth as glass. Saren leaned into her hand. He closed his eyes. It is you, he said. I do not know how, but the hum, the static, it is the same. He opened his eyes. They were wet. I looked for you, he said, for 20 years. I looked for a way to bring you back. I never thought... I know, she said. She leaned her forehead against his. I am sorry I left you. You saved everything, he said. Calith survived. The pod made it to deep space. Where is he? Gone, Saren said. Waiting. He has been seen in the nebulae. The people think he is a god now. And they think you are a saint. If only they knew, Illyra said bitterly. She pulled back. She went to the control panel on the wall and entered a sequence. The magnetic locks on Saren's chains disengaged with a snap. Saren rubbed his wrists. He stood up, wincing as the circulation returned to his legs. He looked at her, then at the door. So, he said, we break out, fight our way to the hangar, just like old times? Illyra shook her head. No, not this time. Saren frowned. Mara, we cannot stay here. Vale will kill us both. If we run, we are just fugitives again, she said. And Vale wins. He keeps the throne. He keeps the power. She turned to the mirror on the wall, looking at her reflection. He made me into a weapon. Saren. He spent 20 years growing this body, grafting my memories, building a symbol to control the galaxy. He wants an Empress. She turned back to him, her violet eyes burning with cold fire. I say we give him one. Saren studied her. He saw the shift. He saw the mechanic vanish and the ruler emerge. What are you proposing? I need a spy, she said. Someone who knows the rebellion. Someone who can move in the shadows while I stand in the light. You want me to work for the Empire. I want you to work for me, she said. I am going to dismantle this coup from the inside out. I am going to find out who really built me, because I found files that suggest Vale is just a middleman. There is something else, a deeper rot. Saren crossed his arms. And how do I know you will not lose yourself? That thing, that body, it is designed to dominate. Watch me, she said. She went to the door. I am going to walk out of here and tell the council that you have agreed to turn double agent, that you have broken, and if they demand proof, then I will give them proof, she said, but not with your blood. The following weeks were a high-wire act performed over a pit of vipers. Elira announced to the council that the pale pilot had been turned. He was now her personal asset, a hunting dog to track down the remaining cells of the resistance. Vale was skeptical, but the public optics were too good to ignore. The Empress taming the rebel ghost? It was propaganda gold. Saren was moved to the servants' quarters in the palace, officially under house arrest, unofficially Elira's shadow cabinet. They met in the dead of night in the royal library, a massive chamber of data crystals and ancient paper books. Vale is moving funds to the rim sectors, Saren said, laying a data pad on the table. He is building something out there, not a fleet, something stationary. Another research ring? Elira asked. She was wearing a simple robe, trying to feel human. Bigger, Saren said. He watched her as she paced. You look tired. Mara, I am starving, she admitted. This body burns calories like a furnace, and I hate the food. It is all nutrient paste and garnish. Saren reached into his pocket. He pulled out a slightly crushed package. Spicy nut ration, he said. I stole it from the guard's mess hall. Elira smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had felt in days. She took the package and tore it open, devouring the contents. Tastes like chemicals and dirt, she said. It is delicious. Saren leaned against the table. He reached out and took her hand. His thumb traced the glowing sigil on her wrist. Do you remember the night on the tanker? He asked quietly. The night before we went to the capital. Elira stopped chewing. She looked at him. The air in the library grew heavy, charged with 20 years of silence, every minute of it. She said, I never got to say goodbye, Saren said. You are saying it now? No, he said. He pulled her closer. The height difference was significant now, but he did not flinch. He looked up at her, not as a subject to a queen, but as a man to the woman he loved. I am saying hello. He kissed her. It was strange at first. Her lips were different, cooler, firmer, but the intent was the same. The spark was the same. Elira made a sound low in her throat, a mix of relief and hunger. She wrapped her arms around him, careful of her strength, burying her face in his neck. He smelled of soap and old leather. He smelled like home. They broke apart, breathless. I am still me, she whispered. I know, Saren said, and I am still the idiot who follows you into fire. The test of her authority came 3 days later. Elira was holding court in the grand hall when an assassin struck. It was a drone, small as a hummingbird, that zipped down from the rafters during a petition from the trade guilds. It fired a monofilament needle directly at her neck. It would have killed a human instantly. But Elira's reflexes were faster than thought. She caught the drone in midair. Her hand closed around it, crushing the metal into scrap. The needle snapped against her skin, leaving only a faint white mark. The court gasped. Guards scrambled. Elira stood up, the broken drone smoking in her hand. She looked at the trade guild representatives, who were cowering. She scanned the crowd. Her vision zoomed in, analyzing micro-expressions. She saw fear, she saw awe, and she saw Vale, standing in the shadows. He looked bored. He knew. She realized. It was a test. She threw the drone onto the floor. Let this be known. Her voice boomed, amplified by the hall's acoustics. I am not so easily removed. She turned to the trembling guildmaster. You were complaining about the debt structures in the mid-rim? She asked. The guildmaster stammered. Yes. Your Majesty, the interest rates? Elira looked at Vale. She smiled. Abolish them, she said. The room erupted. Vale stepped forward. Empress, you cannot simply... I just did. Elira cut him off. If the guilds cannot protect their Empress from assassins in her own hall, they clearly lack the funds to secure their own operations. We will relieve them of the burden of collecting these predatory debts. Effective immediately. She swept out of the hall, the cheers of the mid-rim petitioners following her like a wave. In the corridor, Saren fell into step beside her. That was dangerous, he murmured. You just cost the banking clan trillions. I just bought the loyalty of 5 systems, she said. Vale wants a populist leader. He just got one. They reached her private elevator. Saren checked the scanner. Clean. We found something, he said, his voice dropping. The drone, it wasn't Vale's tech. What? It had a signature on the CPU. Ancient coding. Pre-imperial. Elira frowned. Who else has that kind of tech? Saren looked grim. The same people who built the facility where you were grown. We traced the supply records for the biotank. It was not funded by the Treasury. It was funded by a shell company called the Ascendancy. The Ascendancy. Elira tested the word. It sounded cold. There is more, Saren said. Vale isn't the master. He is the caretaker. The coup 20 years ago, the Meridian Blade, they were just the cleanup crew. The Ascendancy orchestrated the chaos to force the Empire into a state where they needed a savior. They needed you, Saren said. Elira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. You mean they killed me on purpose? She asked. Saren nodded slowly. They knew about the dragon. They knew you would try to save him. They calculated your sacrifice, Mara. They let you die so they could harvest your consciousness and build a god to rule for them. Elira leaned against the wall. The betrayal was so vast it was dizzying. Her entire existence, her heroism, her death. It was all just a line item in a spreadsheet. Then we are not just fighting a government, she said softly. We are fighting the architects of history. Saren took her hand. Then we burn the blueprints, he said. Elira squeezed his hand. Her violet eyes narrowed. Vale thinks he is playing a game of chess, she said. He does not realize I am about to flip the board. The elevator chimed. Tonight, she said, we go into the archives, the deep archives. If the Ascendancy built me, they left instructions. I want to know what I am really capable of. And then, Saren asked. And then, Elira said, stepping out into her chambers, we go find my dragon. The escape from the capital was not the dramatic, explosion-filled departure that usually defined Saren Cade's career. It was embarrassingly bureaucratic. Elira, using her override codes, simply assigned herself an unscheduled diplomatic inspection tour of the mid-rim sectors. They took a nondescript courier vessel, the Stardust Moth, which Saren complained smelled like old socks and ozone. "You are the Empress of the galaxy," Saren grumbled, adjusting the controls as they jumped into hyperspace. "You could have commandeered a dreadnought instead. We are flying a toaster with engines." "Subtlety, Saren," Alira said, checking her reflection in the darkened viewport. "A dreadnought attracts attention. A toaster attracts indifference. Besides, I need to know if I can still fit in a pilot's seat without crushing the upholstery." She shifted uncomfortably. Her 7-foot frame was folded into the co-pilot's chair like an intricate origami sculpture. Her knees were dangerously close to the navigation console. "You look ridiculous," Saren noted fondly. "I look like a very tall, very wealthy eccentric," she corrected, which is exactly the cover story. "I am Lady Vespera of the Highborn Expanse. You are my manservant, Jeeves. I am not calling myself Jeeves. You will if you want to get paid," she teased. Their first destination was Cyclos, a planet perpetually racked by electromagnetic storms. It was a world of floating cities tethered to the ground by massive conductive cables, a haven for black market science and unlicensed bioengineering. It was where the supply chain for her resurrection tank had originated. They landed on a swaying landing pad in the lower district of the city-state Nimbus. The rain fell in horizontal sheets, sizzling against the ship's shields. Alira wore a heavy hooded cloak that obscured her glowing sigils and alien features. But nothing could hide her height. She moved through the crowded, neon-lit streets like a shark swimming through a school of minnows. Saren walked a step behind her, carrying a decorative but heavy case that actually contained 3 high-yield blaster pistols and a change of socks. They found the contact in a back-alley clinic that advertised genetic cosmetic enhancements. The doctor, a nervous, 4-armed alien named Dr. Xylos, took one look at Alira and dropped his scalpel. "I know that work," Xylos whispered, his lower eyes blinking rapidly. "I did not splice the genes, but I grew the base matrix. The neural lattice. It was commissioned 20 years ago. Top priority. Imperial seal." "Who commissioned it?" Alira asked, her voice low and distorted by a vocal modulator. Xylos hesitated. Alira leaned forward. She did not threaten him. She simply let the sheer physical pressure of her presence fill the small room. The doctor trembled. "It was a shell company." Xylos squeaked. "The ascendancy. But the payment..." "The payment came from a private account linked to the Chancellor's office. Not the Treasury. A slush fund." "Veil," Saren said, stepping out of the shadows. "There is more," Xylos said, rummaging through a stack of data slates, the specs for the body. They were not just for aesthetic perfection. They asked for high-conductivity neural pathways, the kind used in deep space navigation buoys. "They turned me into an antenna," Alira realized, a cold knot forming in her stomach. "Not just an antenna," Xylos corrected, "a receiver." The second stop was a rim, a desert moon in the forgotten sector of the Outer Rim. It was a place of dry heat and silence, where the wind carved singing sculptures out of the red rock. Here, they sought the old believers, the original cult of the starworm that predated the Empire's sanitized propaganda. The heat was oppressive. Alira found that her new physiology adapted instantly, her skin retaining moisture, her eyes shielding themselves from the glare. Saren, however, was sweating profusely and complaining about the sand getting into places sand should never be. "A noble lady would have an umbrella holder," he muttered as they trudged up a dune toward a cave entrance. "A good manservant would not complain about the weather," Alira shot back. They were met at the cave mouth by a blind priestess. She was withered, her skin like parchment, but she smiled when Alira's shadow fell over her. "The vessel has arrived," the priestess croaked. Alira froze. "Vessel?" The priestess beckoned them inside. The cave walls were covered in ancient star maps, painted in pigments that glowed in the dark. But they were not navigation charts. They were biological diagrams. They showed a dragon, Calith, and they showed a humanoid figure. Lines of light connected the two minds. "The prophecy is a lie," the priestess said, tracing the lines with a bony finger. "Or rather, it is a manual that was turned into a religion. The star worms are not gods. They are partners, but they are picky. They speak in a frequency that burns the human mind to ash." She turned her blind eyes toward Alira. "Unless the mind is housed in a body built to dampen the signal, a biological transformer." Alira looked at the diagram. The humanoid figure had the same geometric markings on its wrists that she now bore. "I was not resurrected to rule," she whispered. "I was resurrected to interface." "Vale tried to control the dragon 20 years ago," Saren said, the realization dawning on him. "That is why the coup happened. He wanted the weapon, but he couldn't use it. He needed a pilot." Alira said, "A pilot's soul, but a dragon's durability. He engineered my death. He waited 20 years for the body to grow, and then he plugged me back in." She looked at her hands. They were trembling. "I am just a key," she said. "A very expensive, very complicated key." The priestess laughed softly. "Keys open doors, child. But the hand that turns the key decides who walks through." The final piece of the puzzle lay on Hydra Prime, an ocean world of breathtaking beauty and horrific inequality. The entire planet was owned by 3 corporate dynasties. The citizens lived on floating pontoons, leasing their living space, their water, even their air credits from the company. Alira and Saren infiltrated the grand gala of the dynasties, a masquerade ball held in a glass dome beneath the ocean surface. Alira wore a mask of black velvet, her gown shimmering like oil on water. Saren was in a stolen waiter's uniform, carrying a tray of drinks he kept sampling. "Blend in," Alira murmured over the comlink. "I am blending," Saren replied. "I just told a duke that his wife looks like a crustacean. He thought it was a compliment. These people are insane. They cornered Director Hestia, the head of the biotech conglomerate, on a private balcony overlooking the abyssal trench. Hestia was a woman made of sharp angles and expensive surgery. She thought Alira was a potential investor from the core. The Ascendancy Project? Hestia laughed, sipping blue wine. Oh, that was our finest work. Vale paid triple for the rush order on the memory grafting. Rush order? Alira asked, her voice tight. Yes. The subject, the original girl, she was inconveniently heroic. Vale needed her dead to start the process, but he needed her spirit intact. Do you know how hard it is to scrape a consciousness off a dying brain in the middle of a reactor meltdown? Alira felt the glass in her hand shatter. Hestia looked down at the shards and the bloodless, glowing hand. Oh my. You have the same modifications. Are you a sister model? Alira grabbed Hestia by the throat. She lifted the woman off the ground with one hand, dangling her over the railing. The abyss waited below. I am the original model, Alira snarled. Saren appeared at her side, placing a hand on her arm. Mara, he said warningly. She is a monster, Alira said, her violet eyes blazing. They are all monsters. They look at people and see parts. They look at lives and see profit margins. And if you drop her, you prove them right, Saren said softly. Alira looked at the terrified woman. She looked at the gala behind them, the laughter, the music, the indifference to the suffering millions on the surface. She pulled Hestia back over the railing and threw her onto the floor. "Run," Elira commanded. "Before I remember that I am a weapon." They fled the party, stealing a high-speed submersible to get back to their ship. In the cockpit of the Stardust Moth, the silence was heavy. Elira sat in the pilot's seat, staring at the stars. She felt hollow. It was all a lie, she said. My reforms, my rule, even my name. Vale let me play Empress because he knew eventually he would need me to call the dragon. He let me build schools and lower taxes because it kept the galaxy quiet while he prepared the final phase. She turned to Saren. Her face was stricken. Am I even real? Saren? Or am I just a simulation of Mara Quinn running on wetware? Saren unbuckled his harness. He walked over to her and spun her chair around. He placed his hands on the armrests, boxing her in, forcing her to look at him. You are real, he said fiercely. How do you know? Because a simulation would not have saved Hestia, he said. A weapon would not care about tax rates in the mid-rim. A tool does not cry over a memory of a stolen spanner. He reached up and cupped her face. Vale built the car, Mara, but you are the one driving it. He thinks he created a puppet. He forgot that when you put a fighter pilot's soul inside a warship, you do not get obedience. You get a war. Elira looked at him. The doubt began to recede, replaced by a slow, burning anger. He wants the dragon, she said. Then let's give him the dragon, Saren said. On our terms. He kissed her. It was not a tentative reunion this time. It was a seal, a pact. They were two broken things that had found a way to fit together perfectly. In the cramped cockpit of a stolen ship, with the galaxy hunting them, they chose each other, not because of destiny, not because of a script written by a chancellor, but because they wanted to. We go back, Elira said, pulling away, her eyes clear. We go back to the capital, and we take the throne, for real this time. They jumped back to the capital system 48 hours later. As they reverted to real space, the communications console lit up like a festival tree. Emergency broadcast. The computer droned. Priority 1. Elira put it on the main screen. It was Vale. He was standing on the balcony of the palace, her balcony. He was flanked by the council, citizens of the Empire. Vale began, his voice grave. It is with a heavy heart that I must reveal a terrible truth. The woman posing as your Empress is a fraud. Elira watched, stone-faced. She is a biological construct, a failed experiment created by rogue scientists to usurp the throne. Vale continued. She has been manipulated by the terrorist Saren Cade. She is mentally unstable and dangerous. The Council has invoked Article 19. She is declared illegitimate. A warrant is issued for her immediate decommissioning. He paused for effect. Furthermore, we have located the promised dragon. He is returning to the capital to judge the usurper. The true heir will be revealed. The feed cut to static. He is flipping the board, Saren said. He knows we know. He is calling Calith, Elira said. She closed her eyes. She could feel it, a tug in the base of her skull. A call. He is using the backup beacon, she said, the one on the palace. He is trying to lure the dragon into a containment field. We have to land, Saren said. We will never make it to the palace, Elira said. The sky is full of interceptors. Then we improvise, Saren said. He pushed the throttle forward. The Stardust Moth screamed down through the atmosphere. They were immediately tagged by defense satellites. Unidentified vessel. Power down or be destroyed. Saren ignored them. Hang on, Your Highness, This is going to get bumpy. Laser fire erupted around them. The shields flared and died. The ship shook violently. "We are losing integrity," Elira shouted. "We are almost there." They broke through the cloud layer. The palace loomed ahead, a mountain of white stone and gold. And then, the sky split open. It was not a ship. It was a tear in the fabric of the atmosphere. A shape emerged from the void, and it was colossal. Wings of obsidian spanned a kilometer. Scales shimmered with the light of dying stars. Calith, the dragon, had returned. He roared, a sound that shattered windows across the city. It was a sound of fury, a sound of recognition. "He is here for me," Elira whispered. The dragon dove, not toward the palace beacon, but toward the tiny, smoking courier ship. "Saren, pull up," Elira yelled. "I can't. The stabilizers are gone." The dragon swept underneath them. A massive claw, gentle as a cradle, caught the stardust moth. The sensation of the empathic link hit Elira like a physical blow. It was not the static of 20 years ago. It was a clear, ringing bell. "Star child, you wear a new skin." "Calith?" Elira thought, tears springing to her eyes. The usurper calls with a false tongue. The dragon's voice resonated in her mind. But I followed the true light. The dragon banked, carrying the ship toward the palace plaza. The Imperial interceptors scattered like flies. On the balcony, Vale watched the massive creature descend. His smile finally faltered. "He is not landing in the containment grid," General Krell shouted. "He is landing on the front lawn." Calith landed with an earth-shaking thud, crushing a decorative fountain. He lowered his hand, and the battered courier ship slid onto the pavement. The hatch blew open. Elira stepped out. She was wearing her travel cloak, torn and scorched. She stood to her full height. Her eyes were glowing so brightly they illuminated the dust around her. Saren stepped out beside her, blaster drawn. A squad of royal guards rushed forward, weapons raised. "Halt!" the captain shouted. "Under order of the Chancellor." Calith let out a low growl, smoke curling from his nostrils. The guards took a collective step back. Elira looked up at the balcony, locking eyes with Vale. She tapped the amplifier on her collar. "You called for a judgment. Chancellor!" she shouted, her voice echoing across the silent plaza. She raised her hand. The genetic sigil on her wrist blazed with white light. Calith mirrored the glow, his chest scales lighting up in a rhythmic pulse. "Here I am." Vale keyed the palace PA system. "Kill her! She is controlling the beast." The guards hesitated. They looked at the Empress. They looked at the dragon. They looked at the man who was screaming orders. Elira stepped forward. "I am not controlling him," she said. "I am asking him." She turned to the dragon. "Partner, partner." Calith agreed. Elira looked back at the palace. "The time for secrets is over," she said. She began to walk toward the throne room, the dragon walking beside her, and Saren Cade guarding her flank. The guards parted like the sea before a storm. The coup was over. The revolution had just begun. The imperial capital of Ethelgard did not fall in a day. It cracked, in the hours following the return of the promised dragon. The city transformed from a monolith of order into a fractured mosaic of panic and allegiance. Calith, the colossal star worm, perched on the ruins of the grand fountain in the plaza, a living mountain of obsidian and starlight. His presence was a gravity well that bent the political reality of the entire system. The royal guard had split down the middle. The gold sashes, loyal to the traditional throne, formed a defensive perimeter around the dragon and the Empress. The Black Helms, Vale's private enforcement division, retreated to the upper spires of the palace, securing the heavy weapon batteries. But the real fracture was in the streets. The civilians fed 20 years of propaganda about stability. looked at the monster in their garden and the woman with the glowing violet eyes, and they did not know whether to cheer or scream. Elira stood in the center of the chaos, the wind whipping her torn cloak. She could feel the pulse of the city through the soles of her feet, the vibrations of troop transports, the hum of shield generators powering up, the terrified heartbeats of millions. "We are losing the narrative," Saren said. He was reloading his blaster, his eyes scanning the rooftops where Vale's snipers were likely setting up. "The longer we stand here, the more time Vale has to spin this. He will claim you brainwashed the dragon. He will claim you are an alien invader." "He is already doing it," Elira said. She tapped her earpiece, listening to the Imperial bands. "He is broadcasting on all frequencies. He is calling for a sector-wide mobilization to purge the biological abomination." She looked up at Calith. The dragon lowered his massive head, his golden eyes blinking slowly. He was calm, terrifyingly so. He was waiting for her lead. "I need a microphone," Elira said. Saren looked at her. "A microphone? You have a dragon. Use the dragon. Fear makes people obey. Saren. Truth makes them choose. I do not want subjects who are afraid of me. I want allies who believe me." She turned to the captain of the gold sashes, a woman named Valerius who looked like she was regretting every career choice that had led to this moment. "Captain," Elira commanded, her voice carrying the unnatural resonance of her engineered vocal cords. "Get me to the emergency broadcast hub. I need a direct line to the planetary network and the hypercoms." Valerius hesitated, looking at the black-clad soldiers on the rooftops. "That is in the media spire, Your Majesty. It is exposed." "Then we better run fast," Saren said, holstering his weapon. The broadcast hub was a circular room lined with banks of servers. Elira dismissed the terrified technicians and stood before the primary holistic interface. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the camera lens. She saw the face of Elira Solari, perfect, alien, regal. But behind the eyes, she felt the grit of Mara Quinn. She hit the transmit button. "Citizens of the galaxy," she began. Across 12 sectors, screens hijacked the emergency override, in the mines of Thraxis, in the corporate towers of Hydra Prime, in the cockpits of smuggler ships in the Drift. The image of the Empress appeared. She did not sit on a throne. She stood in a dust-streaked cloak, her hair windblown, her hands resting on a console that looked too small for her. "My name is Elira Solari," she said, "and my name is Mara Quinn." She saw Saren in the corner of her vision, watching her with an intensity that anchored her. 20 years ago. I was a mechanic on Vera 9. I fixed thrusters and scraped rust. I died in an orbital dock to save a creature that had done no wrong. She leaned in, her violet eyes piercing the transmission. I was dead. The man you call Grand Archon Vale did not mourn me. He harvested me. He took my memories, my consciousness, and he planted them in a body grown in a vat. He built me to be a weapon. He built me to be a key that would unlock the power of the promised dragon for his own use. She held up her wrist, displaying the glowing genetic sigil. This is not a mark of divinity. It is a barcode. I am an illegal experiment. I am a violation of nature. On the streets of the capital, the crowds went silent, in the palace spires. Vale watched his screen, his face turning a shade of purple that matched the drapes. But Vale made a mistake. Elira continued, her voice gaining strength. He thought that by changing my skin, he could change my heart. He thought that power would make me forget what it means to be powerless. She looked at the camera, and for a moment, the alien distance vanished. She looked human. She looked like a girl who had thrown a spanner at a gunman to save a stranger. I am not the Empress you were promised. I am not a god. I am a survivor. And I am telling you that the war you fear is already here. It is being fought by men in white suits who view your lives as fuel for their machines. I am done being a symbol. I am asking you to stop looking at the crown and look at the actions. Look at the debt forgiveness. Look at the supply lines. Look at the truth. The signal flickered. Vale was trying to jam it. Choose, Elira said, her voice cutting through the static. Do not choose me. Choose yourselves. The feed died. Silence hung in the room for a second. Then, the tactical map on the wall lit up. The outer rim sectors just went green, Saren said, his voice hushed. They are pledging support. The miners' guilds, the transport unions. The inner rim is flashing red, Captain Valerius noted grimly. The corporate worlds are siding with Vale. They are mobilizing private fleets. It is a civil war, Elira said, stepping back from the console. No, Saren said. It is a revolution. A heavy boom shook the floor. The lights flickered. They are breaching the blast doors. A soldier shouted from the corridor. Vale is not just jamming the signal, Saren said, checking his scanner. He is moving his pieces. He is not coming for us. He checked the energy readings. His eyes widened. He is powering up the star forges beneath the palace. And he has activated a localized tractor beam. Calith, Elira breathed. She ran to the window. In the plaza below, the dragon was roaring. Beams of red light, thick as tree trunks, were shooting up from the ground, wrapping around his wings, his neck, his tail. He was being dragged down, phasing through the pavement as if it were water. Vale is pulling him into the sublevels, Elira said, horror cold in her chest. The ancient foundries. He is going to bind him, Saren said. He does not need you anymore. He has a backup plan. We have to get down there, Elira said. The descent into the star forges was a journey into the belly of a mechanical beast. The palace was built on top of ruins that predated the human colonization of the sector. Massive geothermal foundries that had once used the heat of the planet's core to forge starship hulls. Elira and Saren moved fast, sliding down maintenance chutes and sprinting across gantries suspended over rivers of magma. The air was thick with sulfur and the heat was oppressive. Elira's bioengineered skin handled it, regulating her temperature, but Saren was drenched in sweat, his breathing ragged. Keep moving, Saren gasped, firing a grapple line to swing across a broken walkway. If he locks that device onto Calith, we are fighting a god. They reached the central foundry chamber. It was a cavernous space, lit by the orange glow of molten metal and the harsh white strobes of Vale's equipment. In the center, suspended in a cage of hard light energy beams, was Calith. The dragon was thrashing, his roar reduced to a pained whine. Attached to his head was a headset, a brutal metallic crown connected by cables to a massive generator. Vale stood on a control platform overlooking the cage. He was flanked by his elite black helms and a team of technicians who looked terrified. You are too late. Empress, Vale shouted over the roar of the machinery. His composure was gone, his hair was wild, his eyes manic. Elira stepped onto the gantry. Let him go. Vale, you rejected your purpose. Vale screamed. You were supposed to be the interface, but you are defective. Too much humanity left in the mix. So I had to improvise. He gestured to the generator. Synthetic empathy. We mapped the neural pathways of 1,000 pilots. We distilled the essence of command. I do not need a partner. I need a slave driver. He slammed a lever forward. The machine hummed. Violet lightning arced from the headset into Calith's skull. The dragon screamed. It was a sound that tore at Elira's mind. She fell to her knees, clutching her head. The link between them was open. She felt his agony. It felt like fire pouring into her brain. Alone, cold, pain. Elira. Saren was beside her, pulling her up. Fight it, I can't. It's too loud. You are not him, Saren yelled, shaking her. You are Elira. You are Mara. You are the strongest thing in this room. Focus! Elira grit her teeth. She forced her mind to expand, to push past the pain, to find the consciousness beneath the torture. Caliph, she projected, I am here. The dragon's mind was a storm of panic. The iron voice, it commands, it burns. Do not listen to the iron voice, Elira thought, pouring every ounce of her compassion and rage into the link. Listen to me. You are not a tool. You are the small star. You are the silence between systems. Vale saw her standing there, eyes glowing. Kill them, he ordered his guards. Saren shoved Elira behind a pillar as laser fire erupted. I will hold them off, Saren shouted, returning fire with dual blasters. Do whatever wizardry you are doing. Elira closed her eyes. She stood amidst the laser fire and the magma heat, and she reached out. He wants to bind you with pain, she told the dragon. I offer you nothing but choice. Break it. You are ancient. This machine is dust. He holds the leash. There is no leash if you do not accept the collar, Elira said. Trust me. Trust the small star. In the cage, Caliph stopped thrashing. He opened his eyes. They were not pained anymore. They were furious. The dragon did not pull away from the machine. He pushed into it. He fed the feedback loop. He took the synthetic empathy and poured his own consciousness back down the wire. The generator began to whine. Sparks flew from the console. Overload, a technician screamed. The neural load. It is infinite. The machine exploded. The headset on Caliph's head shattered. The hard light cage flickered and died. Vale was thrown back by the feedback, his control console sparking. Caliph roared, shaking the debris from his scales. He looked at Vale. He did not attack. He simply projected. He projected the truth. Every screen in the chamber, every data pad, every connected device in the palace network suddenly lit up. They did not show a dragon. They showed memory. They showed Vale ordering the sabotage of the reactor 20 years ago. They showed the tanks where Elira was grown. They showed the assassination orders, the bribes, the cold-blooded calculations of a man who would burn a galaxy to rule the ashes. It was not a legal trial. It was a psychic flaying. The entire capital saw Vale's soul laid bare. Vale scrambled to his feet, looking at the screens, seeing his secrets vomiting out for the world to see. No, he shrieked. Turn it off. He pulled a heavy weapon, a disruptor cannon from a crate. He aimed it not at the dragon, but at the pillar where Elira stood. If I cannot rule it, I will break it. He fired. The energy ball hit the gantry supports. The metal groaned and sheared. The platform Elira and Saren were standing on collapsed. They fell toward the magma. Catch. Caliph moved faster than physics should allow. He dove, snatching the falling debris out of the air. He swept up, carrying them through the smoke, crashing through the ceiling of the foundry, up through the sub-levels, smashing through the marble floors of the grand hall, and bursting out into the open sky of the capital. He deposited them on the ceremonial platforms, a ring of anti-gravity discs floating 1,000 feet above the plaza. Vale followed. He was wearing a prototype flight suit, jets screaming, clutching the disruptor cannon. He was beyond reason. He was a cornered animal with a nuke. He landed on the opposite platform. The three of them floated there, the city watching from below, the cameras droning overhead. End of the line. Mechanic! Vale screamed. He raised the cannon. Elira stood up. She did not raise a weapon. She did not raise a shield. She looked at Saren. Ready? She asked. Always, he said. They moved together, not as warrior and sidekick, but as a unit. Vale fired. Elira moved left, her speed blurring. She drew the fire. Saren moved right, closing the distance. Vale tracked Elira. She was the big target, the monster. He forgot the pilot. Saren slid across the smooth surface of the platform, firing 3 precise shots. The first hit Vale's knee. The second hit his shoulder. The third hit the power cell of the disruptor cannon. The weapon exploded in Vale's hands. The Chancellor was thrown backward, skidding to the edge of the platform. He teetered there, staring down at the mile-long drop to the plaza. He looked up. Elira stood over him. "Do it!" Vale hissed, blood running down his chin. "Finish it! Prove you are the monster I built!" Elira looked at him. She looked at the millions of people watching on the screens. She looked at the dragon hovering silently behind her. She reached down. She grabbed Vale by the collar and pulled him back from the edge. She threw him onto the center of the platform. "No," she said, her voice amplified by the silence of the city. Monsters kill to hide their fear. Queens let the law do its work. She turned to the camera's drones. Chancellor Vale is under arrest for high treason, conspiracy to commit genocide, and the illegal experimentation on sentient life. The cheers from the city below started as a rumble and grew into a roar that shook the clouds. Vale slumped, defeated not by a bullet, but by mercy. Elira looked at Saren. He was holstering his blaster, a crooked smile on his face. "You owed him a push," Saren said. "I owed the galaxy a choice," she replied. The victory was absolute, but the morning after was a mess. The Empire did not magically heal. Vale's faction surrendered, but the power vacuum was immediate and dangerous. The corporate worlds were threatening secession. The Outer Rim was demanding independence. The Loyalist generals were looking at Elira with suspicion. 3 days later, Elira summoned the remnants of the council, the leaders of the rebellion, and the corporate heads to the Grand Hall. She sat on the throne, but she did not wear the crown. It sat on a pedestal next to her. "We cannot go back to what we were," she told them. "The empire of one ruler is dead. It died with Vale." General Krell stepped forward. "Then who rules? Empress? You?" "No," Elira said. "I am a genetic experiment with a limited lifespan and a questionable claim to humanity. I am not a ruler. I am a guardian." She gestured to the room. "You will rule. A transitional council. Elected representatives from every sector, inner, mid, and outer rim. You will write the laws. You will set the taxes. And what will you do?" a corporate CEO asked skeptically. "I will make sure you do it honestly," Elira said, her violet eyes flashing. "I will hold the fleet. I will hold the dragon. And if any of you tries to become another Vale, I will remind you of the view from the ceremonial platform. It was an untested solution. It was fragile. It was dangerous. But it was fair." The room erupted in debate, but for the first time in centuries, it was a debate, not a decree. Elira walked out of the hall, leaving them to argue over the future. Saren was waiting for her on the balcony of Starlight. "You just gave away absolute power," he noted, handing her a drink that smelled of cheap synthale. "It didn't fit me," she said, taking a sip. "It was too heavy." Saren leaned against the railing. "So, guardian. That sounds like a lot of work." "It is," she said. "I have to earn it, every day." "And what about the pilot?" Saren asked. "Does the guardian need a sidekick?" Elira looked at him. The sunset was painting the sky in bruised purples and golds. "I do not need a sidekick," she said. "I need a partner, someone who will tell me when I am being arrogant." Someone who remembers who I was before the vat. Saren touched her hand. The glowing sigil on her wrist pulsed, warm and steady. I can do that, he said. But I am charging you for the ale. Put it on my tab. She smiled. A shadow fell over them. Caliph hovered near the balcony. The dragon looked different. The scales were brighter, the eyes clear. He was no longer a myth or a prisoner. He was a traveler. The currents call. The dragon spoke in their minds. The deep dark. You are leaving? Illyra asked, feeling a pang of loss. The binding is broken. I must heal in the fires of the nebula, but I am not gone. The dragon dipped his head, looking at Illyra. You are the anchor. When the storm comes, call. I will answer. He looked at Saren, pilot, fly true. With a beat of wings that displaced the air for miles, Caliph turned and shot upward. He accelerated faster and faster until he was just a streak of iridescent light against the darkening sky. Then, with a flash, he folded space and was gone. Illyra watched the spot where he had vanished. She felt the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders. The political fights ahead would be brutal. The peace was fragile. She was an alien in her own skin, a woman out of time. But she felt Saren's hand in hers. She felt the cool evening air. She felt alive. The human girl had died in the dark to save a promise. The alien Empress turned from the railing, her hand in Saren's, ready to walk back into the light and build a world worthy of that sacrifice. Ready? Saren asked. Illyra Solari smiled, and it was a mechanic's smile, stubborn, sharp, and entirely unafraid. Let's get to work.